This is Becky Schmidt, the Sierra librarian, and I'm back reading books for all of you for the summer. So I have two books that I think are pretty cool. This is a Star Wars graphic novel, so like a comic book, and I'll be reading this later. And then I have Beauty and the Beast, and this one is sort of pictures and words, like a short chapter type book, and I'm going to be starting to read this one today. So tune back in. I won't read the entire book in one segment because this is a little lengthy. We'll see how much I can get done, and then I'll be adding more posts later, so you can look forward to that. So this is an adaptation of Beauty and the Beast, and you can see that it has the pictures from I believe the most recent Beauty and the Beast movie. And it says it's based on the story and adapted by Elizabeth Rudnick. So I'll read the words and then I'll show you the pictures. So here's our story. Once upon a time there lived a young prince. He was handsome but heartless. He cared only for outer beauty and material things. The prince surrounded himself with priceless paintings, extravagant riches, and beautiful objects. And one evening the prince threw an elaborate masquerade ball, and as the festivities wore on, the prince surveyed the beautiful subjects before him. He danced with one maiden after another, until suddenly there came a great knock on the ballroom door. A moment later, a great gust of wind ripped through the open windows, causing the candles to flicker and the ladies to let out startled screams. So this is before the candles flickered. Furious at the interruption, the prince turned to see who had caused this disturbance. In the center of the ballroom stood an old beggar woman. Falling to her knees, the woman begged for shelter from the bitter storm raging outside. In exchange, she offered the prince a single rose. The prince was unmoved and waved the old woman away. "You should not be deceived by appearances," the beggar woman warned, "for beauty is found within." The prince threw back his head and laughed cruelly, but as he turned his back on the woman, he heard a collective gasp. He spun around just as the room filled with light. There's the beggar woman. Where once a horrible hag had stood, there was now a beautiful enchantress. This time it was the prince who kneeled. He had been put to the test, and he had failed. "Please," he cried, begging for forgiveness. But his words, the enchantress knew, were as hollow as his heart. With a flick of her wrist, she cast her spell. The air filled with magic, and when it had cleared, the prince was gone. In his place stood a hideous beast, a beast as terrifying and cruel-looking on the outside as the prince had been on the inside. The enchantress cast a spell on the rose and gave it to the beast. Then she told him the terms of this curse. The prince would remain in his beastly form until he learned to love and found someone who could do what he had not, look deeper than appearances and love him for who he was and not what he had appeared to be. And if the last petal fell from the rose before that day arrived, he would remain a beast forever. And there's the enchantress with the rose. In a nearby village lived a kind, intelligent, independent young woman named Belle. Belle had lived in the same small home in the same small village for almost her entire life. Every day was the same as the day before. She saw the same people and did the same things. The provincial life was fine for the villagers, but Belle yearned for more. She wanted adventure, like she read about in the pages of her favorite books. While Belle was generous of heart and fair-minded, another resident of the village was quite the opposite. Vain and arrogant, Gaston loved only one thing more than adventure: himself. He knew that men in the village wanted to be him, and the ladies wanted to marry him. And Belle was the most beautiful girl in the village. That, Gaston reasoned, made her the best. And he, as the most handsomest man in the village, deserved the best. But no matter how hard Gaston tried to win Belle over, she wanted nothing to do with him. Every attempt he made was met with polite yet firm rejection. This particular version is a song. It has a CD with it, and so this is the section of the book that would normally be the song, so, which I'm not going to sing for you, sorry, but it's talking about her in the village. Belle's father was a music box maker, and one day he set off on his horse, Philip, or Philippe maybe, to sell his music boxes. As he entered a dark forest, it began to snow. Then Maurice heard a howl, and he and Philippe were surrounded by a pack of hungry wolves. Just when Maurice was sure they were doomed, he spied a gate. It opened, and Philippe raced through, and seconds later it slammed shut, stopping the wolves in their tracks. Looking ahead, Maurice saw a huge castle. Leaving Philippe in the stable, Maurice made his way up the front steps. "Hello," he called out as the door creaked open. "Anyone home?" Shivering, Maurice stepped inside. "Forgive me," he said. "I don't mean to intrude. I need shelter from this storm." "Hello." Suddenly, the smell of something delicious wafted through another set of doors. Following his nose, Maurice found himself in a dining room. "Do you mind? I'm just going to help myself," he recalled. Reaching out, Maurice picked up a piece of bread and a hunk of cheese. Then a cup of tea slid into his hand to help wash it all down. Startled, Maurice looked down. The teacup was alive. Letting out a yelp, Maurice put the cup down and ran. Pushing open the castle's front door, Maurice hurried down the steps and fetched Philippe. He paused as he passed a row of rose bushes with glistening white roses. Every time he went on a trip, Belle asked him to bring home a rose. He was sure Belle would love one of these. He reached out and plucked a rose. "Those are mine." The words echoed off the castle walls, and instantly Maurice began to shake. Before him, a giant beast appeared out of the shadows. It walked on its hind legs and wore a long, tattered cloak. "You entered my home," the creature said, dropping to all fours, encircling Maurice. "This is how I get repaid?" Maurice tried to apologize, but before he could get the words out, the creature lifted him off the ground and dragged him into the castle. Back in the village, Belle was tending to the garden when Philippe appeared. Rushing over, Belle saw the horse's bridle was ripped, and he had several scratches along his side. He let out a sad little whicker. Quickly, Belle put a saddle on Philippe's back and threw on a new bridle. She needed him to take her to her father. Belle and Philippe raced through the forest. Soon they arrived at the castle. Taking a deep breath, Belle walked through the doors, knowing her father must be inside. As Belle's eyes adjusted to the dark, she thought she heard whispering. "But what if she's the one?" a voice said. "The one who will break the spell." "Who said that?" Belle asked, turning toward the noise. No one answered. Instead, Belle heard someone coughing. "Papa!" she cried, running toward the sound. Belle grabbed a nearby candelabrum and raced up a giant staircase and through a castle. Reaching the very top of a smaller staircase, she realized she was in a prison tower. Through a single door made of iron, Belle heard the coughing again. "Papa!" Belle cried out. "Is that you?" "Belle?" Maurice's muffled voice answered. "How did you find me?" Rushing over, Belle dropped to her knees in front of the door. "Oh, Papa," she said, reaching through the openings in the iron. "We need to get you home." To her surprise, Maurice urged her to leave him behind. "Belle, this castle is alive," he cried. "You must get away before he finds you." "He?" Belle repeated. Suddenly, a roar filled the tower. "Who are you?" a voice said. "How did you get in here?" I've come for my father," Belle said bravely. "Release him." "Your father is a thief," the voice replied, sounding closer. "He stole a rose," the voice roared. Belle turned to confront her father's captor and let out a gasp. Standing in front of her was a huge creature. It had horns and fangs, and its entire body was covered in golden brown fur. The word beast flashed in her mind as she gazed upon the creature. Lifting her eyes to meet beasts, Belle was surprised to see that they were bright blue and almost human. Then the creature roared again. "Punish me, not him," Belle said. Her father shouted in protest, and Belle was at a loss. She could not leave her father behind, but she knew her father would never agree and allow her to take his place. Forced to make a terrible decision, she agreed to leave, but before she departed, Belle asked the beast to allow her one last moment with her beloved father. The beast didn't move. "Are you so cold-hearted that you won't allow a daughter to kiss her father goodbye? Forever can spare a minute," Belle cried. To her surprise, the beast opened the prison door, and rushing inside, Belle embraced her father. "I should have been with you," Belle said, hugging her father tightly. Maurice tried to comfort his daughter and urging her to forget him and live her life. "I love you, Belle. Don't be afraid," he said. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And I will escape, I promise." Suddenly, Belle pushed her father out of the cell and slammed the door shut, locking herself inside. She had made her choice, and there was no going back. Belle's fate now sealed. The beast dragged Maurice away and threw him out of the castle. Belle had not been in the cell long when she heard voices. Moments later, the cell filled with light. To her surprise, Belle found herself looking at a small mantel clock and a candelabrum. They were alive! She shouted in surprise. "What are you?" "I am Luminaire," the candelabrum replied, swinging broadly. "And you can talk?" Belle asked. "Of course he can talk," answered the mantel clock, whose name was Cogsworth. As Belle watched, the two began to argue. It was only a moment before Luminaire took charge, to Cogsworth's dismay, and opened the cell door. "Ready, miss?" he asked, pointing to one of his candles toward the exit. The odd pair led her back through the castle until they reached a huge set of doors. When the doors opened, Belle found herself looking at a beautiful bedroom. It seemed she would not be staying in a cell after all. Back in the village, Gaston was brooding. No one had ever said no to Gaston, no one except Belle. "There are other girls," his friend Le Fou pointed out. He nodded over his shoulder. A group of pretty girls sat in the corner looking at Gaston hopefully, and Gaston barely noticed. As Gaston's best friend, it was Le Fau's job to cheer him up. Running around the tavern, Le Fau got the villagers to pay Gaston compliments. No one was as great as Gaston. No one was as strong as Gaston. No one was as admired as Gaston. And Gaston sighed. He had heard them all before, and of course they were all true. He was exceptional. So why, then, did Belle refuse to marry him? If only he had a way to change her mind, some leverage to make her say yes. Just then, the door to the tavern flew open and Maurice stumbled inside. He was shaking and his clothing was torn. "Help!" Maurice cried. "Somebody help me. We have to go. Not a minute to lose." "Whoa, whoa, whoa," the tavern keeper said. "Slow down, Maurice." Maurice shook his head. "He's got Belle locked in a dungeon." Gaston sat up straighter, his interest piqued. "Who's got her?" the tavern keeper asked. "A beast," Maurice answered. "A horrible, monstrous beast." Instantly, the tavern filled with laughter. "This isn't a joke. His castle is hidden in the woods." Maurice stopped and looked around the room. "Will no one help me?" As Gaston listened to the man ramble on, he had an idea. "I'll help you, Maurice," he said, getting to his feet. "Lead us to the beast." And as they headed out of the tavern, Gaston smiled. He would help Maurice save Belle from the so-called beast. Then she would have to marry him. Inside the beast's castle, Belle sat in a new room, feeling sad. She was all alone in a strange castle full of enchanted objects, and she was sure she would never see her father or her home again. Just then there was a loud knock on the door, and a moment later she heard the beast demand she join him for dinner. Later she heard, "You've taken me prisoner, and now you're asking me to dine with you?" Belle answered through the door. "Are you mad?" That was not the right thing to say. She heard the beast snarl, order her servants to not let her eat, and then storm away. Luckily, the beast servants didn't always listen to their master, and soon a lovely teapot named Mrs. Potts came to comfort Belle. She was the housekeeper of the estate, and before Belle knew what was happening, she found herself sitting at the head of a large dining table. Luminaire led the plates, the cutlery, and the rest of the staff in a grand musical presentation of the most elaborate and delicious meal she had ever had. As Mrs. Potts led Belle back toward her room, Belle couldn't help asking, "Don't you ever want to escape?" "The master's not as terrible as he appears," Mrs. Potts answered. "Somewhere deep in his soul there's a prince of a fellow just waiting to be set free." Belle thought about what Mrs. Potts meant, but then her thoughts drifted to another mystery. "Luminaire mentioned something about the West Wing," she said. Mrs. Potts shook her head. The West Wing was off limits. She told Belle not to think about it and then go to sleep. Then she wished her a good night and headed back to the kitchen. And I'm going to stop there for today, and I will read more later. Thanks for joining me, Sierra and others. Bye for now.